and welcome back to the Strategic Leader podcast with Fee Craig and me, Gemma Bullivant. In this episode, we're going to be looking at our next instalment for our strategic toolkit. And Fee's proposal for this is handling conflict effectively, handling conflict well. So Fee, tell us why you believe that handling conflict should be in our strategic toolkit.
The first reason is that conflict is all around us. We have the potential to step into a conflict situation any day of the week over any matter, big or small. We are all different people. We all come to work with a different set of eyes, a different set of perspectives, a different lens on the world. We tackle things differently. We have different beliefs. We have different ways of doing business. We have different ways of going about things. We express things differently. And that all leads to the potential for moments of conflict, big and small. And how we handle this and how we're kind of okay with it and what we have at our disposal for moving through, particularly some of those big things, has a huge impact on the efficiency with which we are able to go about doing our work and the sort of mental toll of going to do our work. Because often it's not working hard that makes us really knackered and worn out by the end of the day or the week. It's the nature of some of the things that we've had to endure during that week. And conflict, I think, has a big impact in that kind of sense of draining and burnout that we can sometimes experience. So that's one reason, which is it's kind of everywhere. There's a potential for conflict every day. But the second reason I think we really need a tool to be able to handle this is because our own perspective on conflict and our relationship with conflict is so fundamental to who we are as a person. It comes from so kind of deep and ancient a place in our psyches that we shouldn't underestimate the impact that that has. I mean, even just the word conflict, if I have a group of people, if I'm team coaching, for example, and I say, how do we feel about conflict? And look around the room, some people will be sitting there going, yeah, all right. Some people are kind of going, like, even the word, and then other words that we might associate it with it. So, for example, I might use the word challenge. How do we feel about challenge? And people go, oh, no, I don't like conflict. So they'll automatically conflate challenge with conflict. Whereas some people will use the word challenge as like, or maybe it's, it's ambition or it's a sort of catalyst to do something better. So there's, we can really respond to even just the word conflict. And it really stems, I think, from our family of origin and how conflict was treated in that environment. Was it welcomed? Was it forbidden? Were we in were we living in a position of conflict? Were we living in a trauma situation? Or what did we see around us? Or did it never occur? Did it never happen? So we didn't really build up the opportunity of dealing with it. That family of origin piece, then what happens to us in life as we grow older, the moments that we have been in conflict and how we've handled it and what's happened, all go to building up a huge sort of pile of evidence for how we tackle conflict. And that has such an impact on how we go about dealing with conflict in the workplace. So I think those are two fairly hefty reasons why we need to have some sort of conflict tool in our toolkit.
Okay, yes, I hear that. And I probably would also add that when we're a leader, when we're in a senior strategic role, others are looking to us to lead the way in terms of how to handle conflicting situations, different perspectives. Perhaps, we have the responsibility as senior leaders to navigate lots of complex ideas, lots of conflicting needs and perspectives. And it would actually be, for me, the sign of some sort of need to self-reflect as a team at a senior level if everybody was always in complete and violent agreement with each other. There's always going to be topics where you violently agree on it, but there should be occasions for some conflicting needs, some difference of opinion, some different perspectives. There's so many ideas fizzing around in my mind at the moment, and memories and different anecdotes from my career. Sometimes it relates to, I think we may have talked about this before, a philosophical stance. So in the context of designing a bonus scheme where some people in the room want quite a an egalitarian approach. We're all in this together. Let's either work as a team. Let's all get an equal share of the pie, profit share type approach. Others favour a much more individual approach, very meritocratic. I want my top performers individually to get more piece of the pie than the lower performers. And I often find myself coming back to there is actually no right or wrong way to do it. Whatever is the right or wrong way is the way that works here. And that kind of reminds me of one of my favourite mantras, which is there's two things can be true at the same time. I know I've said that before, but absolutely certain I've said that before. Two things can be true at the same time. So sometimes we can get really sucked into this idea that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, or that person knows more than me, therefore they are right and I am wrong. And we've talked about opinions versus evidence before, and preference. Is it my opinion that I'm hearing here, or is it actually something that is a bit different to that? There's so much in all of that I think really lends itself to us having a proper deep dive conversation about conflict as being an integral strategic tool. So I feel like I'm already accepting it, but let's
a
let's
relief.
Let's explore it a bit further and see where we get to.
Yeah, well, you've already given me like a really good place to start when you're describing different approaches to designing, for example, a bonus scheme, and this would apply to anything that you're doing. Let's separate in our minds the difference between task conflict and a relationship conflict. So task conflict is when we have got a piece of work to get done and we might disagree about that piece of work. So in your example, I think it should be egalitarian. I think it should be a meritocracy. We fundamentally disagree on the task, but we can potentially have a very hearty, constructive, comfortable discussion about those two perspectives without any interpersonal conflict. We can just be disagreeing on the task. I respect you fully as a professional and you respect me fully as a professional. And we're using that to kind of stress test all the ideas. And maybe at the end of the day, one of us will change our minds and that's all good. It's purely about the task. And in that circumstance, we can think about conflict as being that bit of grit in the oyster to create the pearl. We need a little bit of something. You use the term, do we violently agree? And that puts me in mind of a team that I've worked with relatively recently who are incredibly nice. Harmony is incredibly important to them, really markedly so. Like we all want to work in a kind of nice environment, but this is harmony above all. And I was like, this is really interesting. I was chatting to one of them and then I had a very similar conversation with someone else later in the day. I think 2 or 3 years prior, they had a different director who was very different kettle of fish, very kind of conflict, very sort of aggressive, very blaming, hugely different way of going about things. And in that situation, conflict wasn't safe. Disagreeing wasn't safe. You could literally be in trouble for disagreeing. It was there was a real big reaction. And culturally, the whole team had learned to just sort of keep their mouths shut. That person left, got a new director, much more harmonious, much more sort of kind, much more open to people's perspectives. But now we've sort of got this legacy of being nice over everything else. And conflict is sort of not acceptable. We just don't do it because we've got this collective trauma from when there was too much. So in that team, my concern is, do we have that bit of creative grit that will mean we will push each other to come up with a better solution or a better solution? I think we can do better than that. Let's try and go there. So we do need a bit of conflict in our task.
What's interesting in the example that you've just described is carrying trauma from a previously unsafe environment whereby the behavior has stuck, even where maybe the environment has changed. And that sometimes as a leader, we need to be aware of that, to not only expect that the safety that we might actively put in place in order for that psychological safety to exist for disagreement to actually show up in a healthy way, but that we may have to be part of some healing process from previous leaders before us. And I think that's a really interesting concept.
And we were talking about task conflict, and then we've ended up talking about the other version of conflict, which is relationship conflict, which is where kind of regardless of the task, you and I just have some beef between us. Now, this could be a kind of deeply fundamental disagreement about how we work, the values that we have, the behaviors that we display. It could be an ego thing, it could be a subconscious thing, but the thing that is in conflict is the relationship. And that can make even quite straightforward tasks quite difficult, because actually the issue is between us. So anything that passes through the pair of us is going to feel conflict, feel like it's conflict, even though the task itself is quite easy. So we kind of need to be aware of these two kinds of conflicts. Task-based conflict, which is objective, cognitive. It's like we can kind of get our, we can kind of go, no, that's what it is. We can sort of put it on the table and point to it. Or the relationship, which is emotional and subjective. So thinking about some conflict situations that you might be in or that you could foresee, just think about which one is which. What have we got? If we can keep to the task-based conflict, anything, or can we turn it into task-based conflict, then that is a better way to lean, an easier way to lean. We can't avoid the other one, but let's see if we can lean towards the task.
Yeah, that's reminding me actually of one of the core ideas in the core strengths inventory, the strength deployment inventory. They've changed the name many, many times. And at its heart, it does have this idea of conflict and how we all approach conflict in a slightly different way. But the thing that I want to just draw attention to, it's a really interesting and very quite a visual way of looking at it, which is basically if you imagine two spheres, two balls, we see everything that leads to the behavior that we exhibit because we're in tune with our motives, we're in tune with our intentions, and we therefore can make some sense of the behaviors that we exhibit to a point. Could argue that there's some blind spots there. But what we see in other people is just their behaviors. And in sense making, sometimes we're attributing our own motives to their behaviors, or sometimes we're assuming the wrong motives that they might have to their behaviors. But whatever it might be, that can be when that conflict can occur. It's this idea that you don't necessarily understand somebody else's motives or intentions or their own approach or their perspective, and that can really lead to relationship conflict. So I think that's a really important one to hold on to.
Absolutely. So thinking about we can see our intention, what's going on the inside, but other people can't. Other people judge us on what they see on the outside, which is the things that we do, the things that we say, our behaviors. So I really like that. I think that's a really important distinction. So I have got a book that I want to recommend to everyone because we think, well, what's a conflict tool? But there's not a single thing that will work in any situation. There's not a sort of little nice 2x2 model to say, oh, yeah, just use this for any conflict situation and it will work for everything. It's a really complex topic. But there is a book that I really love. And so I just want to share it with you in case it is useful to you. I know you've got a great book as well, but we will definitely come back to it. But the book, which I'm holding up on screen for our visual listeners, is called Smart Conflict. It's by Alice Driscoll and Louise Van Hart, and I was actually at Henley Business School with Louise. So which is why I came across this book in the first place. But it's called, it's Smart Conflict, is doing conflict well, how to have hard conversations at work. These conversations are hard, right? Most people don't find conflict easy. Some do. Just a sort of self-awareness watch out if you do find conflict easy is like just pay attention to the impact of that on other people. But in this book, they have a 5-part model for elements of conflict. It's not a kind of linear thing that you have to work your way through one and then the other, but there's 5 kind of things to think about when we think about conflict. And so I thought it might be really useful just to break these down and we can maybe have a chat about each one as we go along. How does that sound? The first one we've talked about a little bit, which is reflection. It's reflecting on your own conflict settings. So these are your sort of pre-programmed approaches to conflict. How was conflict dealt with in your family of origin and your early life and even your formative experiences and work? Was it present at all? Was it there and somebody was modeling really well how to deal with it? Was it swept away and pretended that was it pretended that it's not there, but you could kind of tell that it was there, but we just pretend it's not there? Did we try and deal with conflict and then just be told that's wrong, that's bad, that's, whatever? We all have settings, which is, I say I'm good with conflict, but there's a switch that trips on my head and then I'm sort of going all guns blazing. What are those settings and how can we become aware of what they are? Because we have to be aware that we are taking those into whatever conversation, any difficult conversation, we're taking those with us. And everything we say and everything we do is built upon those conflict settings that we've had for decades.
That's really interesting because I've often wondered from time to time, certainly not something I think about every day, but it's kind of brought this little wonderment to the front of my brain momentarily while having this conversation, which is I'm an only child and I sometimes have speculated, does that mean I just didn't get any practice at arguing with siblings? And therefore, I didn't get any practice in just arguing in a relatively safe space whereby it's allowed to argue and then move on and all play nicely again. And it is something that I've thought about as to whether that has in some way, been attributable to some of the settings that I have, because I don't really like conflict. I would definitely put myself in the category of a lot of people don't like conflict, as you've mentioned.
Yeah.
And I would definitely identify with that group.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I did have a brother, but we received the message from one of our parents who had lost their brother fairly early on in life. Don't argue with your brother. Don't argue with your sibling because you're lucky to have one, because I lost mine. And so we kind of were not allowed to argue with each other in any major way. Because we were told you mustn't do that because I didn't have one, so you should just be grateful. Which, of course, I was not grateful for my brother in my youth, and nor was he grateful for me. Obviously, we've grown out of that. But at the time, there was conflict, which sibling conflict probably quite, like you say, safe, comfortable, normal, but we kind of weren't allowed to have it. So what does that do to me? Like conflict, your urge to go into conflict is wrong. So these things can go quite deep. It's really, really interesting. So anything that we can do to reflect on those things, because we're taking them into that conversation with us, and so is the other person or the other group of people or whatever that conflict moment might be. They're going to bring their own settings in. Obviously, we can't control theirs, but we can explore through coaching, through self-reflection. So asking ourselves some really deep questions, just thinking about it. Psychotherapy does a brilliant job of this. What is our relationship with conflict and what does that mean for us in the workplace?
Okay, I like that one.
So that's
What's the
reflection.
second one?
Is that first one? Yeah, second one is regulation. Knowing how to check in on how you feel and calm yourself before, during, or after a hard conversation. So this is emotional regulation. Being aware of the state that you are in and being able to do something about it. Like, am I coming into this feeling agitated, nervous, worried? And what is that going to do to my behaviors? And is that going to affect the outcomes? Or can I go, do you know what? I'm not loving this, but I'm going to be okay. It's going to be fine. Let's assume positive intent. Let's just calm myself. I'll take some deep breaths, whatever it is I need to do. But thinking, what state am I in? What am I bringing with me in terms of my physiological state? Is my heart racing? Are my palms sweaty? Am I assuming all sorts of things? Can I just leave that emotional state at the door and just bring a neutral one in? What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Regulation is that's the next step, isn't it, from awareness? It's okay, I'm aware of it. Now what do I do with it? How do I work with it? How do I recognize when that might be influencing the way I show up, where that might be influencing how I feel about things, where that might be influencing what I choose to believe about something? It all stems back to that regulation point. I absolutely think that can be a little bit of a lost point in a lot of these areas is that whole question of regulation.
Do you know how to regulate yourself? Do you have habits or things that you use to regulate yourself? I mean, you're a pretty chilled person. I've known you for a very long time, but there must be moments where you just feel really kind of hyped up in some way. What do you do to regulate yourself?
Yeah, definitely make a conscious decision to step away if that's an option, to, go for a walk or take some deep breaths, or choose to come back to something in a different frame of mind. I've got this expression that I often use, which is, I'm just going to put that in a balloon and watch it float away. I'm a really visual person. So this idea of letting go of whatever it is sometimes a little trick that I use. It depends on the situation, obviously, but sometimes I declare it. And the number of
Yeah.
things, it's funny you say, I'm a very regulated person. I can't remember how you describe me, but sometimes I will say to somebody, I'm really angry. And they'll go, really? Are you? Because I don't look it. I've been doing some, not angry necessarily, but frustrated. I've been learning upholstery as a skill.
Yes.
And there was one damn corner on the cushion and I just couldn't get it right. And it took me hours to literally do about 3 folds. And the class teacher kept coming over and going, no, you just need to tuck it in there and you just need to do. It was lots of you just need tos. And I was like, in that moment, I was kind of like, my shoulders were going back and I was taking deep breaths. And I was like, that really, really hacked me off. Not her, the task. The task really hacked me off. But even in that moment, she said, I didn't realize you were so frustrated. Because I suppose I just keep this duck above water while the legs are flapping about type of idea. So we do have to be really careful of that. That goes back to those spheres where you only see somebody else's behaviors. You don't see everything that's going on inside of that person.
Yeah. But I think it's really interesting to acknowledge what we are feeling and going, I am worried about this conversation. It's okay to be worried about this conversation. Is it helpful for me to take that worry into the room? I am feeling anxious. If we are feeling anxious, there's no point someone saying, don't feel anxious. You saying, okay, well, I do feel anxious and I can still have this conversation really well. Either I can leave it at the door. Yes. Your balloon, I love saying, what do you need to leave at the door? You can come and pick it back up at the end. It's like, we're not trying to eradicate it. You can pop it there. You can pick it up on your way out, but it probably isn't helpful
I like
for this.
That
so
too.
Let's just, it's just, we're not trying to get rid of it. I mean, I do the deep breaths. I do the, how would future me like me to behave in this next 15 minutes is a question I run through. Like, what kind of way of tackling this is future me going to be proud of if I look back on this in 6 months or something like that? That sort of future me question, ways of regulating. So I guess that's that second point about regulation. Can you do it beforehand? Can you do it in the moment? I recognize I'm getting angry. Can I just slightly dissociate myself from the anger and say, I am feeling angry, but I don't have to behave in a way that is angry. And that's not being inauthentic. It's just slightly separating those two things out. And then how do I look after myself after an uncomfortable conversation? Do I need to take myself for a walk? Do I need to take some deep breaths? Do I need to listen to some music or, whatever it might be? But just paying attention to that regulation of our emotional state. I mean, I'd almost say that is a leadership tool in its own right, but let's not digress. So those are 2 R's of the 5. We've got 5 R's. We've done 2. The third one is readiness. Now, this is a bit more functional here, which is gathering the data, choosing your strategy. How are you going to tackle the nuts and bolts of this conversation? Is it a piece of feedback that you need to give to somebody? Is it a complex thing that needs to be worked out? What do you need to have with you? Do you need some evidence? Do you need some examples? Do you need some diagrams or some tools? Do you need some data in front of you to have this conversation? Are you ready to have it? And it might be that difficult conversations and conflict moments, we can say, can we still, like you said, can we step away from this and come back to it? Like that idea of being am I actually ready to have this at a functional level? Have I got the materials that I need? So this one is a bit more functional around data, evidence, strategy. How am I going to approach this? Have I thought through how this is going to go? What the possible responses could be? How might I tackle those? How ready am I for this conversation, basically?
Yes, that one's quite task focused. Really leaning into the function of doing whatever it is that we need to do, the conflict activity that we are engaging in to be able to do that in the right way. And it's calling to my mind the fact that often when we go to training and when we think about how we do this, we perhaps spend most of our time on that. It's calling to my mind giving difficult feedback or giving constructive feedback type training. And that if we've just figured out the readiness, the data, the thinking through the activity, we'll do it well, forgetting some of the other aspects, forgetting the psychological safety, forgetting the environment that as a leader we create each and every day in order to make that conversation go well when it's necessary. I was coaching a leader a few months ago now, and we were talking about tricky feedback, and he was reflecting on whether that had damaged their relationship. And what we were talking about was each and every interaction that you have with that individual, how you operate more broadly outside of the 5, 10, 15 minutes that you spent in that room delivering that piece of feedback, are a big part of that equation. So it isn't like everything hinges on that conversation. It's what happens around it, the psychological safety that you create, that actually is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting in that moment.
That idea about social capital, we build up in advance through all our interactions with somebody, which means we can go into conflict situation with them because we've got that kind of weight on our side. But the readiness one, I think, we do spend quite a lot of time on it, but we often miss we're talking about perhaps giving somebody some feedback. Rehearse the words you are actually going to say. So we go into it with the idea that we need to communicate, but have we actually practiced the words that we need to say? And we talk about this sometimes when we talk about asking for a pay rise, which is, what is the biggest number you can ask for without laughing? It's the same kind of, say it out loud. Practice saying, I want you to pay me £450,000 for 2 days a week. Straight face. Spoiler alert, I don't earn that kind of money. But can you literally practice saying the words out loud? I need you to understand that when you hand your reports in late each week, that creates extra work for me and it creates a lack of trust in the team. I don't think you want that. So let's just talk about what that looks like from your perspective and what we can do about it.
Yeah.
Can I practice those words, my opening line, so that I don't waffle, I don't go too long? So just literally practice what you're going to say. What is and I think opening line and maybe kind of closing line. What's the line I want to get to? Which might be, I'm really glad we've had this conversation. I'm really glad we understand each other more. Thank you for being so candid with me. I don't know, it's something to say, this is where I really want to get to at the end of the conversations. So that's our readiness one. Number 4, response.
Yep.
So developing techniques that mean that we are ready to respond in the moment. And we talked a little bit about in the moment already, but this is response as opposed to reaction. We've talked loads of times about when we're suddenly put into a moment of threat, which we can often feel when we're in a kind of conflict situation, particularly if it catches us by surprise. But even if it doesn't, even if we know it's coming, we have our really basic kind of ancient brain reactions: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, basically. Doesn't give us a great deal of choice. There's very little nuance, and most of those are not appropriate for the modern workplace. But if we can pause and if we can go, hold on a second, use that self-regulation. How would I like to respond? I guess this is my question about, what does future me want me to do now? How can I go, right, okay, I'm not going to get mad. I'm not going to lash out. I'm not going to defend myself. I'm not going to hide and run away and go, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm going to say, okay, what would a professional person do now? What would a person who is totally in control of this situation do now? What would someone who is very comfortable with being uncomfortable say now? These are the kinds of things, if we are able to practice moving from that reaction to that response, we have a lot more nuance and a lot more options available to us, almost any of which will be better than one of those core fight, flight, freeze or fawn responses that just come out so quickly when we're put into a threat situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's really linked to the regulation point, isn't it? It's this idea of that theory of that Viktor Frankl, between every stimulus and response, there's a space, and that space is there for you to choose what to do next in relation to that stimulus. And it's absolutely, for me, the difference between react and respond. A reaction for me is an emotional, almost knee-jerk, certainly fairly subconscious, unconsciously delivered. It's connected integrally to your emotion. A response has much more of a rational driver behind it. It is a choice. We can choose to get really angry with another car driver that cuts us up on the road, that whole road rage analogy. We can choose whether to carry the anger that we feel based on what that driver has just done in that moment. We can choose to carry that for as long or as short as is our choice. And some people really absorb that and take it with them the whole day. Others maybe just brush it off. And I think there's a real skill in really tuning into whether you are responding or whether you are reacting, and what needs to happen in order for the right response to be there.
It's a huge topic, isn't it? And it's part of our I think this is kind of what we call presence as a leader. A leader who we describe as having presence in the room is somebody who can choose their response to a moment of threat or conflict that comes up and go,
Mm-hmm.
I am not liking this situation. I'm really angry about this, but this is how I think we should move forward, and kind of just keep calm, regulated by still being authentic about saying this is what's going on for me, but being able to kind of keep control of the emotional state. So that is our fourth one, response. And we have a last one here. Oh, I say a last one. These don't necessarily come in a linear order. We need to think about all of them, and we might need them at different times. But the last one here is repair. So understanding the importance of repairing a relationship after we've had a moment of conflict. And I guess this goes from everywhere from, just acknowledging that something has happened and not kind of pretending like this conversation never happened, through to thinking, okay, what needs to happen now? How can we get back to our previous position? And again, this is where this idea of social capital comes in, because if we've got lots of social capital in the first place, the chances are we've got less repairing to do because the relationship can take more robust conflict. But how do we rebuild that? Is that things like generally, supporting somebody in their endeavors and saying, look, I do support you. This is not a relationship conflict. It's purely task conflict. I support you in this, that, or the other. Can I visibly agree with you in lots of different ways? There can be all sorts of things that we can do to repair. It doesn't have to be going to buy someone a bunch of flowers or a box of chocolates afterwards. Although that might be the right thing, who knows? Unlikely. But, how can I show that I want this relationship to be back on a really good track? It might even just be saying, I acknowledge we've had this conflict position and that things might be tense with us for the next few days. I really want to get back to being able to be really candid and open with each other. I want to repair this. Might just be enough to say, this is my intention. I'm acknowledging it and speaking it into the room. That might be enough to repair. But thinking about what might this person need for repair is that last R.
Yeah, that's a really good one, isn't it? And I think, what that's also making me think of is the idea of most people just want to be heard. They want to have at least had their ideas or their perspective heard and honoured. And we've talked before, haven't we, about disagree and commit. This idea that maybe it isn't your perspective, it isn't your preferred option. In that bonus example, there would have been people in the room that did not want to do the direction of travel that ultimately happened. And part of the repair in some scenarios is literally just acknowledging that and saying, look, I recognize that that isn't the direction you wanted. And, letting them feel like their perspective has been listened to, albeit it hasn't actually been followed through in that direction, and just giving that space and that time for that to happen can sometimes be enough. And also what you mentioned earlier in the conversation about repair might be about something that's happened before. The repair that's needed might be in that scenario that you described with that team, where they are carrying the scars of a previous environment, and repair is actually needed in that respect to enable that team to move forward into the space that they now need to operate in.
I think that's such a good point. I'm not sure I would have thought of that actually, but as a team, they definitely needed to repair their relationship with each other. Not that the conflict was with each other, but just the impact of that, to acknowledge it, to look at it, to kind of deal with it without judgment, and then hopefully let it evaporate. So I think there's so much richness in this model, these 5 R models from this book, Smart Conflict. Obviously, we'll put all this in the show notes, but it is a hard recommendation from me. And I guess the final point I want to just add in here with conflict, because this is kind of how I think about it from, the first time you become a people manager all the way upwards. And it can be quite small things. Any position that requires us to kind of manage other people, and particularly when we step into leadership, we have to be okay with being willing to be unpopular. We don't have to, We're not seeking to be unpopular. No, we're not trying to be unpopular, but we have to be willing to be unpopular in certain moments, because we are always going to have to deliver some news that people don't like. You're not going to get that pay rise. You haven't got the job. The project has been pulled. Nobody's going to want to hear any of those messages, but it's going to be your job to deliver them. And so you have to be okay with what you get back in those moments. And I think just that you had to be willing to be unpopular. Am I willing to be unpopular in the moment? Generally, that unpopularity is only going to last for a few minutes, but it's like, have I got the presence to just be okay with that for a few minutes until we move through this conflict or whatever it is? And I think that's such a good question to ask yourself. You know, how can I hold my nerve and just say the unpopular thing when I have to?
Yes, definitely. Speaking as somebody from an HR background, I think that skill was ingrained really quite early on in my career because it's not usually the most popular function in an organization. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It comes up time and again, doesn't it, when people first step into leadership roles and have to make some difficult calls, have some challenging conversations, and lead the way in representing the organization. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, they are great. That's a great book. I think I might have a little read of that myself. That sounds really interesting. I think it's a bit of a no-brainer that constructive conflict and dealing with conflict in a constructive way goes into the toolbox. I feel like we're on room 101 now.
Yeah, it's definitely going in. Yeah, I think we agree on this one, don't we? Because we can't avoid it. And it's so fundamental to who we are that the better we get at it, the less it's going to weigh us down when it comes to the weekend.
Yeah.
Or, when you go home, we don't really want to take that conflict home with us. So leaning into it, going, right, what are the tools? Is it this book? Is it you've got a great... What's the book that you had, Jem? Because I really like the title of that book that you were reading on conflict. Have you got that to just
the
quickly share?
The book I was reading, I was having a bit of a look, was Have a Nice Conflict, which is not to say it needs to be done with lots of sugarcoating. That's not the spirit of it. The spirit of it is that actually it's a good thing to do. So it's nice in the concept of good rather than nice in the concept of shilly-shallying around the edges and never getting to the heart of it, which we definitely don't advocate. So how to find success and satisfaction in the most unlikely places is the little strap line there. So that's a really good read as well. We've got a couple of episodes as well in our back catalogue that might be of interest on this topic. Certainly that one that we referred to before, episode 3, did we say?
Which one? When there's one on series 4, episode 10. This is when our encyclopedic knowledge of our own episodes comes out.
Yes.
But
so series 2, episode 3, you won't remember because that was when we had a special guest on in your absence, and obviously as well as pining for you, we had a good conversation about the whole concept of conflict avoidance. And series 4, episode 10, we talked about, is it possible to be too nice at work? And we dug into the whole idea of kind versus nice. And we actually got quite a lot of really good feedback on that one around, it being really helpful to distinguish between those two terms. So we'll put links to those as well in the description, and, by all means, have a bit of a dig around in it for that as well.
Thank you so much for listening today, everybody. I really, really hope that you've got some thoughts about dealing with conflict that are useful to you. Thank you, Jem. It's good to be doing this podcast with you. So thanks for listening and see you next time.
Thanks for listening. Goodbye.